China has a new leader. Xi Jinping officially took over for Hu Jintao earlier today in Beijing. It was no surprise to anyone. This is a transition that's been years in the making, but we are getting some details about what we can expect from Chinese leadership in the future. And so we turn to William Wan in Beijing via the miracle of Skype to learn what we discovered from today's transition. It's no surprise that Xi is in the top spot, but we learned who the whole 7-member committee that will be ruling China is, and what do we know from that about the future of the country?
It's a disappointment for people who are hoping for reform, for a lot of the dissident community, a lot of the economists who had hoped this would mean a freeing of some of the economic obstacles. New committee members that are going to lead China are senior, older, conservative folks, and a lot of the younger folks just lost out this time around.
Right, the youngest of the 5 that were announced is 64. So we're talking about an old group. They'll be well into their 70s when the next transition happens, presumably in 10 years. I think it's worth digging into the 2 types of reform that Chinese people tend to be interested in. One, the type that gets the most attention in the West, are civil liberties, those type of democratization type reforms. The other, though, equally or more important to many Chinese, are economic reforms, getting the state out of business. So on both fronts, we think it's stalled progress based on this government?
Yeah, so of the 2, the political reform is much harder to get through. But with the new group now in, even the economic reforms look like it's going to be pretty tough. They opted for stability rather than change this time around. And so even economic reforms that everyone says is desperately needed, those may fall by the wayside. You're talking about breaking up monopolies from state-run enterprises, freeing of the currency. Yeah, a lot of things like that. It's unsure how much they'll be able to change.
I wonder, beyond that top headline, what the coverage in China, what the vibe in China is about the transition.
A lot of people here just don't care about the transition, surprisingly, because they see all of the communist leaders kind of one brand. And so a lot of people very pessimistic that even if the younger reformers had come in, how much they could really get done. And when we talk about reform, it's important to keep in mind all of this reform, the point of it is to keep the Communist Party in power. So in a larger sense, you talk about even having voting within the Communist Party. Even if that were the case, it would be to vote Communist Party members toward leadership. It would be picking between different communist leaders. So ideas of reform very different in China than what people in the West typically think of.
And yet you describe the political disaffection in a similar way that many Americans feel about their own system. These guys are all the same.
That's true. And one funny result of the way that the new 5 kind of council members came out is that you have people, we talked about the older former presidents and their factions. So the people who got voted in are part of the much older Jiang Zemin crowd. The younger people from current President Hu Jintao, they didn't get in, but they got into the lower kind of ruling body. And so what you have is kind of this similar situation to having a Democratic president and a Republican House. And so in addition to kind of pessimism about reform, you might have some kind of gridlock in terms of what can really get done in China and what kind of changes can it bring.
Interesting. William Wan in China, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.